Hey, composing gloves here. And today we are going to be talking about the dominant 7. We're going to be composing with it. So this is a little thing I composed for you. Give it a listen, and then we will talk about how I did this. The idea is we're going to now work with the G7 chord, use it in a small composition. So I'm working in C minor. I didn't use a key signature. I just wrote in all the flats. I did that so you could see stuff. You don't have to be like, oh, is this flat or sharp or whatever. Just decided to work explicitly by using flats. Okay. You notice there are 2 7 chords. We care more about this 7 chord right now, and then we'll talk about this one after. So the G7 chord, you notice we're moving in a minor key, but a dominant 7 is a major chord. And I used it for its typical property. That is, it pulls very strongly to the 1. So if C minors are 1, G dominant 7 will pull very strongly to C minor. I'll actually pull really strongly to C major, but in this case, it'll work fine because we've established C minor as the tonal center. So this G7 is doing that. And I might be going, wait a second, what the heck is this? I'm not used to seeing, you've got a lot more fancy here. Like, I'm not used to seeing this over with this mumbo jumbo. And this is a G7. What the heck are you talking about? Well, okay. Let's think about, I'm using what it's called inversions. And I haven't talked about them yet. So inversions, we're going to save that later on. But right now, I'll show you that it's all the same notes. So we have G, we have G, B, D as our major chord, and then our minor 7 is F natural. So I could rearrange this. If I bring this B down and this G down, we have a root position, and I played clarinet for the longest time, so these lower ledger lines are like no problem at all. But if you're not used to it, this is a G. It's 2 ledger lines down on the treble clef. So we have a G7 chord, and you see it is. And all I did was I moved this G up and this B up. And we made it natural because before it was flat. And so I needed to make it natural. And that is how we wound up with a G7 that looks like this. So this is called an inversion. Inversions are cool. Just a little quick demo. Let me bring up a piano here. So you see C is my lowest note. And we notice the quality that we get with C major. This chord quality is the major chord quality. But we can actually have like sub qualities. And they are accomplished by using inversions, and there's actually other tricks too. But basically, C, then now if I move this C, this one, up here, it's still got all the notes of C major, but now it's been moved up. So that's inversions for it in a nutshell. And so that's what I'm doing over here. This is a G minor, G, B flat, D, but you notice D is on the bottom, the G is in the middle, and the B flat's on top. And this is another inversion. This is still a G, B flat, D, but now I moved the B down. And so that's inversions. So I have a G7 chord, and it is pulling very nicely to the C minor. So it's got a really strong pull. Let me also show you, I chose to voice things closely or vary them so I didn't have a repeating figure, because you might be going, how'd you decide to use these inversions? Well, my melody's going ba-da-bup-bup, and I could go bump, bump with the lower line and have it repeat the same thing, but it'd be more interesting to have it like go up and down. It fit because I'm going da-da-da-da. So it fit to sort of have it like sort of do bump, bump, like sort of sound like it's moving, but be all the same notes. So that's what's going on here. That's how I picked to do this. And so in this case, I actually wrote out the melody first. And I did not have a chord progression in mind. I was seeing like, ooh, where could I put a 7 chord in this madness? And so that's where I settled on right here. None of the other spots really seemed like good candidates except for this spot. And the other spot that looked like a good candidate was over here. But I ended up changing it, and I'll explain that move in just a second. So wrote out my melody, bum, 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 ba-da-bum, bum. And I said, oh, this would be nice because it resolves pretty clearly to a C. We're moving on the 5, and remember the dominant chord specializes in moving to the 1 chord, and if we add a 7, it's even better at that job. Let me show you what it sounds like without the without the inversion. So here's what it sounds like without the inversion. Pay close attention to the voicing. It just sounds a little more clunky because now we're jumping around the keyboard more. In this case, it actually works out pretty nicely, but I like the other one more. So hopefully the chord progression exercise from the previous video, it gives you insights on stuff like this, like what we would expect it to sound like here. So we know this is going to sound pretty nice without even just by like the laws of theory. So I'll give it one more listen and then I'll change it back and you can compare. So we get don, don is sort of a jump. And then here we go. So you see it's a little more crunchy. It's like da, it's just crunchier. And it's because we have this second now in the middle of our chord. I like it more. I think it sounds cool. You might like the other one more. Whatever floats your boat, right? So anyways, that's what's going on. On the piano also, this would be easier to play. It might not be easier to recognize for new pianists, but it would be easier to play because your fingers have to move less. So that's also convenient. So if you like the chord quality, it's also like plus benefit, easier to play on the piano. If you're writing for an orchestra, then I guess it doesn't really matter because everything's just whatever with an orchestra. It's a totally different ballgame. So, okay, that's what we have going on there. Just moving. That's a pretty good example of a 7. And even though it's minor, I decided to make it major just because that quality, the tonal center of C has already been established, really powerful. So let's go ahead and talk about this move. And then I also want to talk about just a couple just general composition things. This seems like a pretty good time to toss them in. So over here, this one, it sounds like this. And you might be going, what the heck is going, what is this? So I actually break into parts right here. It's like not really parts, not like how parts are typically looked at. And it's in piano writing. So parts have these different stem options, but basically up here, I wanted my chord to hang out on G, but then call that last note down there as part of this chord. And so what you can do is I wrote one note on layer 1. And so you click this 1 to write a mu score on layer 1. That's usually the layer you're writing on. And then you click the 2 to write on layer 2. And you notice here there's this like weird rest, but it's like, it's not visible. I turned it off. So when I print it, it won't be there. And this rest is moving it. So I'm writing on layer 2, starting on beat 3. So I have to shift it over. So this is playing a G. I wanted to play a G. Originally it was a dominant 7, but that sounded like trash. Just because I was trying to figure out, oh, maybe it'd work over here, you know? So I went with minor 7 and I wrote a G chord and it's G, B flat, D. And then I needed the 7, right? I wanted to call to it, but I didn't want to call it on this beat. It was sort of like giving away the surprise. I wanted something that would pull me into the next part and make sense instead of just giving it all to you right there. So that's what this guy is. We changed to bass clef and this is an F. And so this chord pulls over and these actually go away and just the G comes in, but I've sounded all the chord tones of a G minor 7 chord. And so this F comes in and pulls us into the next section. And yeah, that's what's going on. So I did a clef change because I wanted to go lower. And so it goes down and it pulls, it resolves up. It's a really nice sound. So I think it does a great job at pulling us through. So you see it's just really smooth, really nice. That's some nice writing right there. Now when you're writing, you probably want your inspector panel open. You notice it just turns off if you don't select anything. But the reason is a lot of times your stems will just be going all over. There's actually rules about stemming and stuff in part writing. And so we're not doing like part writing though. This is just a piano part. And this is just an accompaniment. And then occasionally it'll like chime in as like an extra voice. So here, we want our note stem stemming up because it's part of this chord, but by default it'll stem down. That's really how part writing parts go. But I'm going to stem it up to make it part of the original chord, and that's like how piano parts should be stemmed. Okay, so that's stemming. Another thing that I just really quick wanted to talk on, let's talk about just general composition. This is a good time to talk about it. Well, part stemming, like really basic. It makes sense when you're doing it. This sort of stuff will occur to you more and more too as you just write more music. If you're still, if you're just writing out like just basic parts, that's just where you're at. Just do that. Do it simple. It should be easily playable by a piano player. It should not be difficult to play. That's what we're aiming to write right now. So, okay. Got all this mumbo jumbo. How did I approach this? So I already told you I wrote out the melody first. And then I thought, well, what chords would go well with it? And I thought, well, this outlines the C minor chord most of the time. I have this one F note, but I can kind of ignore it as a passing tone. And so that's like what's going on there. And so we have C. So I said, this is pretty much C minor. So I just chimed out a C minor, this one, G minor. But then I noticed I have this melodic phrase. Da, 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 da. And I knew I wanted that to be a very specific way. So I used a slur to show that this should like jump like da, da. And so on piano, it's a little strange because, you know, on a slur, on a woodwind, you just you blow air through the whole thing. So the notes are literally connected by the same stream of air. It'd be do, 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 you know, there's not like do, 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 where there's separate bursts of air. But on the piano, it's more of just a phrasing instruction. And then I wanted these notes to be staccato, and that just means separated. So these notes are separated, and then these are tenuto, which tenuto, I don't know, it just means long. These are elongated. I'm not sure if that's like the literal translation, but it just means longer. So I wanted do, 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 do. So I had this very specific sort of phrase in mind. And so I wrote that out, and I maintained this throughout. And this is a stylistic sort of motif. It's a motif's just basically like a small theme that I have going on. So this idea is throughout it, sort of pulls it together. And so that's what's going on there. And I did that. I followed this progression through. I noticed on this one, I treated them as separate chords. So you have what's called harmonic rhythm, which is how your chords appear in your song. And so I'm changing chords pretty much every measure. But here, I'm sort of coming to the conclusion of a phrase. So you see, that's pretty much his statement. Like I've said something. So here, I treat the last two. This is very common just to have like something like this going on. So I interrupt my harmonic rhythm. Here, I do the same thing. And on the last beat, I do a similar move, but this time it's all part of one chord. It's 2 bars. I wrote out my next part of the melody, figured out what notes I thought would go well, and changed my accompaniment to match what I thought would mirror the melody the best. So you see how this one's longer, because to me that made sense. Dun, 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 dun. And now it's sort of contrasting because this is so short, but now it's like pulling out. So this is sort of like a stylistic call and response, meaning this thing says something and then this one responds to it. It's mimicking what it said before though. So it's not really a call and response, but it's, you know, it's reacting to what has come before. And so now down here, I go into a scale run. And before I just wrote da na 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 na, I just wrote that out. And then I decided to double it with octaves and make them staccato to keep the feeling the same. And then at the end, I finish out with my da da. And now here I don't do the slur, but well, let me play this part real quick. So you see, it's very similar in style right here to up here. Very similar, but it would be played differently. They're different styles. This one has just a slightly different feeling because there's no slur. So, because these were connected before, these ones are all separated, at least a little bit. While these ones are elongated. And then, of course, we finish on our tonic note. So this is like a phrase building up, and we have like phrases, musical sentences, all these different structural components, which are taught in later harmony classes. So, okay. That is pretty cool. So that's all I'm really going to say about this. I mean, we could get into more stuff about like what exactly is going on, but now you should just go and compose a couple of them. Get used to writing music like you just got to practice, right? So if you're not writing like super crazy stuff or things like this aren't occurring, then just keep it simple and then look for ways you can make it interesting without taking away from the main idea. Try experimenting. That's like how a lot of this stuff goes down. You throw a couple new tools in your toolkit, and then later on you'll say, oh, this worked really well last time, and you can throw it in right from the get-go and come up with even better stuff. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.